The main points, if you need to get up to speed on the state budget, you all know now you're going to get another $400 electricity credit. You'll get it in 2 instalments, one for winter and then one for summer, just a couple of months before the next election, in case you forget. You already know about those student assistant payments of up to $250, free public transport for students. Other fees and charges are going up by 2.5%, which the government obviously argues is well below inflation. So they're some of the cost of living measures. Stamp duty, when we look at the changes there, the stamp duty-free threshold has increased slightly to $450,000, so that might help about 5,000 home buyers. It's a fairly big spending budget. Metronet, as I mentioned, it's blown out by $700 million. There's a lot of spending on the health system, which clearly needs it, a lot of spending on housing as well, as our population is set to hit 3 million next year. And then let's look at that debt figure, which over the next 4 years will rise to $40 billion. So I guess what we want to try and explore today is what is sustainable, what is not. And I want to go to Cassandra Winzar, who's the Chief Economist at the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, more commonly known as CEDA. Cassandra, I suspect you are one of the people that did read the budget. Good morning.
Good morning, Nadia. Yes, definitely spent a lot of time reading the budget papers yesterday.
That 3 million people that we're going to hit in WA next year, is this big spend going to help cope with that?
Look, some of the demand for the sorts of things that are being funded in this budget are definitely driven by population growth. So we're seeing a lot of demand for housing, for health services and for other infrastructure. But I think a lot of the concern about the really high level of spending that we're seeing is whether we're just adding more fuel to the fire around inflation and continually needing more and more workers to do more and more things all at the same time, and that real issue with how busy the private sector is at the moment, and adding to that a lot of public sector work going as well.
What about the cost of living relief? Is it too generous? Because there's a lot of people struggling, but again, it is those one-off hits. As some people described it, it's like throwing sugar to ants.
Yeah, look, a lot of people will be quite happy about the cost of living relief, I imagine. We would have really liked to have seen a bit more targeted, so at lower income households that are absolutely doing it toughest at the moment, rather than the really broad-based measures such as the electricity credits. And I think really the biggest thing that governments, both state and also federal, could be doing at the moment to get cost of living under control is to make some meaningful progress on housing availability and affordability.
Okay, let's talk about that then. First of all, when you talk about more targeted or structured approach to a cost of living relief for those struggling families, the government will always argue, but we can't means test people. We don't have that data. But then I've spoken to, say, Nick Bruning, for instance, from our Money Matters panel, who yesterday made the point you could actually provide relief to concession card holders, for instance, or people with a healthcare card or a Commonwealth Seniors Health card. Like that would not be hard to do.
Yeah, look, it's certainly a little bit more tricky for state governments to target when they don't have access to things such as Centrelink payments. But there are ways they can do it exactly as you've described, and it would really be better to be targeting those households. What you'll see with things like the electricity tax credits or the school credits is that they're going to a lot of households that really don't need them, and that can add, with all the other spending as well, to the inflationary environment, which is actually only going to keep cost of living higher for longer. So it might not have the desired impact in the long term.
But the government will argue inflation in WA is still lower than the national average.
It is a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. But what we really want to do is get that under control as quickly as possible. And while it's heading in the right direction, it's not going there quickly enough. And we've seen that reaffirmed by the RBA earlier this week, that inflation is absolutely still a concern. And it really, because of that, needs to be front of mind for any spending decisions from governments at all levels.
Cassandra Winzar is my guest this morning, Chief Economist with CEDA, which is the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. A lot of money's being spent on housing. Surely that's an investment that is justified?
Absolutely. So it's great to be seeing all this money on housing. We need more social housing. We need more affordable housing. We need more housing non-stop. The challenge the government is really having at the moment is around actually getting the workforce and overcoming some of these barriers to actually spending that money and getting housing supply to actually increase. So it's good that the money is there, but we're seeing a lot of challenges with implementation. And I think when we look at that with all the other spending going on, all the other infrastructure work as well, that actually adds to the challenge of getting housing under control because there's a lot of competition for construction workers and those in the industries, and we really should be prioritising the housing spend.
So are we doing too much at the same time? Is that pipeline of work coming on board too quickly?
Yeah, so we're seeing huge infrastructure spend in this budget, so an additional $12 billion of infrastructure. And what we really need to see is more prioritisation there and spreading that out over a longer time period. Infrastructure is really important, and we do want better public transport and roads and rails and health system and all of that. But we need to be really careful about the timing of that spend and whether that is competing with things like getting housing under control or also crowding out private sector investment.
So what's the priority?
Housing definitely needs to be the priority because the housing challenge is really underpinning a lot of issues with getting workers across all different industries. So we need to prioritise housing and also make sure that we have health services and getting some of that health infrastructure under control as well.
Metronet, we see in the budget confirms that there is another blowout and quite a significant one, $700 million. Granted, $254 million of that will be met by the states, the rest bankrolled by the Commonwealth. Is it worth it?
Look, public transport is really important, and it's really important to opening up some additional housing supply in the state, but it is looking very expensive, and I think this is partly because we've been trying to do too much at once and we haven't been able to get the workforce and get some of these things going quickly enough. So I think the issues that we've seen with Metronet, we need to make sure that does not blow out to other infrastructure spending as well. And that's where the concern is. If we're doing too much in the infrastructure space at the same time, all we're going to see is higher costs, more cost blowouts and not meeting timeframes.
The government's boasting another surplus, but then we look at the debt sitting at $28 billion at the moment, and over the forward estimates, so in 4 years' time, estimated to hit $40 billion. Should we be more concerned about that?
Look, I think it is something we need to be a bit concerned about and consider, and it does feel like to some degree we're repeating the past mining boom where we saw, a lot of infrastructure spending, a lot of things happening all at once, and we actually again had growing debt during a time when we had a lot of money coming off, and we know that was really difficult to deal with when the boom ended. And so I think we need to try and do a bit more to make sure that we don't end up in that position again. So I think there is an argument to be made for scaling back that infrastructure spend, which would then scale back the debt as well, and make sure that when the iron ore dollars are not flowing in the same to the same high degree they are at the moment, that we have a little bit more ability to respond and to do things like doing spending programs then, rather than at the moment when everything is kind of going full bore already.
But is it the issue with debt now that governments just sort of kick that can down the road and say, well, it can actually be a problem for the next government?
Yeah, and look, debt serves the purpose, and it's not, it's hard to say what exactly is the right level of debt for government to have, but it's certainly useful, and at some periods it makes sense to be adding to debt. But to be adding to debt at a time when we have really big surpluses, we have a lot of revenue, it is certainly a concern about what the situation will be when we don't have those same revenue sources.
I'll leave it there. Good to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Cassandra Winzar there. She's the Chief Economist at CEDA.